You may believe bullies disappear after school, but the truth is they simply evolve and show up in adulthood wearing different masks. They're in the workplace, in relationships, and even in everyday interactions, using intimidation, manipulation, and subtle control to get their way. Adult bullies thrive on power plays, and if you don't recognize their tactics early, you risk becoming their target. They may not throw punches, but their words, actions, and behaviors can cut deeper, leaving lasting damage. The first step to protecting yourself is knowing they exist and refusing to let them define how you live. Most people grow up thinking that bullying is something that ends when we leave the schoolyard, but the reality is very different. Bullying doesn't vanish, it transforms. Adult bullies don't push you into lockers or steal your lunch money. Instead, they operate in far more calculated and damaging ways. They hide behind positions of authority, social status, or emotional manipulation, using subtle but powerful tactics to keep others off balance. What makes them harder to identify is that they often disguise their behavior as help or honesty, when in truth, it's about control and dominance. You'll see them in workplaces where one person constantly belittles or undermines colleagues to maintain power. You'll find them in personal relationships where they twist your words, guilt-trip you, and make you question your own judgment. Sometimes they're the friend who always has a backhanded comment about your achievements, or the partner who insists on making every decision for you under the pretense of knowing what's best. They may not raise their voice, but their actions slowly chip away at your confidence, independence, and peace of mind. What's dangerous about adult bullies is how invisible they can be. Because their tactics are often subtle and dressed up in normal interactions, people overlook them or excuse their behavior. Over time, this creates an environment where the bully gains more ground and their target loses more control. Recognizing the warning signs is not just about protecting yourself. It's about reclaiming your strength before the damage goes too far. Once you understand how these people operate, you no longer play their game on their terms. Instead, you put yourself back in charge of your choices, your voice, and your story. The Intimidator. The most obvious type of adult bully is the Intimidator, and they operate much like the bullies you remember from school, except their methods are far more sophisticated and sometimes more dangerous. This type of person relies on fear to get what they want. Instead of physical shoves or playground threats, they use their voice, their presence, and their authority to dominate and control others. You'll recognize them in the way they raise their tone to shut down a conversation, how they lean into a space to make themselves seem larger, or how they create an environment where others feel like they're constantly walking on eggshells. They thrive on the discomfort of those around them, and the more nervous or uncertain you look, the stronger they feel. In the workplace, the Intimidator might be the boss who yells during meetings to ensure nobody challenges their ideas, or the colleague who uses sarcasm and biting remarks to silence contributions from others. Their goal isn't collaboration, it's control. They want to remind everyone who holds the power, and they do this by creating an atmosphere of fear where people hesitate to speak up. In personal relationships, the Intimidator may show up as the partner who uses threats, anger, or ultimatums to get their way. They might not physically harm you, but the emotional pressure they exert can feel just as heavy, leaving you drained, anxious, and always anticipating the next blow-up. The danger with intimidators is that their tactics are often normalized. Many people brush off their aggression with excuses like, "That's just how they are," or "They don't mean it, they just have a temper." But excusing the behavior only fuels their dominance. By ignoring it, you give them permission to keep using fear as a tool, and over time, it conditions you to shrink in their presence. This shrinking, lowering your voice, holding back your opinions, avoiding confrontation, becomes a habit that slowly erodes your self-confidence. Intimidators are skilled at spotting who they can control, and they will continue until they meet resistance. Another important aspect of the intimidator is their ability to manipulate group dynamics. They understand that by instilling fear in one or two individuals, the rest of the group will fall in line. For example, in a team setting, if they humiliate one person publicly, Others quickly learn to stay quiet to avoid being the next target. This not only silences voices, but also creates a culture of compliance where creativity, honesty, and individuality are stifled. The Intimidator thrives in these environments because their dominance goes unchecked and people begin to equate survival with silence. Psychologically, intimidators need others to feel weak in order for them to feel strong. Their aggression is often a mask for deep insecurity, but unlike the vulnerable person who works on their flaws, the intimidator projects their inner chaos outward. They don't want to deal with their lack of control, so they force others into submission to cover it up. This is why their behavior can escalate if you push back. They're desperate to maintain the illusion of superiority. They may try to scare you with louder voices, harsher words, or even threats to your reputation or stability. But here's the key. Once you learn not to flinch in the face of their performance, their power weakens. Recognizing an intimidator means paying attention to how your body reacts around them. Do you tense up before speaking? Do you replay conversations in your head afterward, wondering if you should have said something different? Do you feel smaller, quieter, or hesitant when they're in the room? Those physical and emotional responses are red flags that someone is using intimidation to gain power over you. And once you see it clearly, you can begin to take that power back. The first step to neutralizing an intimidator is understanding that their outbursts and aggressive presence are deliberate tools. They are not accidents. Knowing this keeps you from taking their behavior personally. Their shouting is not about your worth. It's about their need to dominate. The second step is refusing to give them what they want: fear. When you stay calm, grounded, and firm in your stance, you strip away their advantage. The intimidator feeds on reaction, so when you stop reacting with fear, their tactics become less effective. Over time, when you consistently hold your ground, you'll notice a shift. The intimidator may test you harder at first, but eventually, they redirect their energy toward easier targets. Bullies, at their core, want the path of least resistance. They don't want to fight battles they can't win. And when you make it clear, through your composure, your boundaries, and your refusal to shrink, that you're not someone they can control, you begin to dismantle their power. The manipulator. While the intimidator uses aggression as their weapon, the manipulator takes a different route, one that is far less visible but often more corrosive over time. Manipulators are the masters of twisting reality. They operate in shadows, shaping narratives, playing with your emotions, and bending the truth until you're not even sure what's real anymore. Unlike the intimidator, they don't need to raise their voice or slam their fist on a desk to control you. They use charm, guilt, rumor, and subtle deception to make you doubt yourself and to get you to hand over power willingly, often without even realizing it. Their greatest strength lies in their ability to disguise harmful intent as concern, kindness, or even friendship. You'll see manipulators at work in professional environments where they whisper rumors about colleagues, carefully planting seeds of doubt to ruin reputations while keeping their own hands clean. They might present themselves as helpful team players, but behind the scenes, they're spinning stories that elevate them at the expense of others. In friendships or personal relationships, manipulators often weaponize your trust. They use phrases like, "I thought you cared about me," or "If you really loved me, you'd do this," to trap you into choices you wouldn't normally make. They have a way of turning the spotlight away from their actions and onto your response, making you feel like you're the problem even when they're the one pulling strings. The manipulator thrives on confusion. They deliberately blur the lines between truth and lies so that you begin to question your own judgment. This is where techniques like gaslighting come into play. They'll deny things you know to be true, or they'll minimize your experiences by saying you're overreacting, being too sensitive, or imagining things. Over time, this erodes your confidence in your own perception of reality. The more you second-guess yourself, the more dependent you become on their version of events. That dependency gives them full control because you stop trusting your inner compass and start leaning on them to tell you what's real. One of the most dangerous traits of a manipulator is how they use guilt as a weapon. They understand human empathy and they exploit it. They will make you feel responsible for their emotions, their failures, or even their bad decisions. If something goes wrong, they'll find a way to spin it back onto you. If you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have reacted that way. The end result is that you carry the emotional weight of their behavior, apologizing for things that were never your fault. The manipulator wants you to feel like the villain so they can stay hidden as the true instigator. Manipulators are also skilled at disguising control as care. They might say, "I just want what's best for you," but what they really mean is, "I want to make the decisions that benefit me." They will cloak their demands in the language of protection, convincing you that they're looking out for your interests when, in reality, they're tightening their grip. Over time, this can feel suffocating because every choice you make is questioned, redirected, or subtly sabotaged until you feel incapable of deciding for yourself. By the time you notice the pattern, you've already lost a significant amount of independence. In group settings, manipulators often play the role of the go-between. They thrive on stirring conflict and then positioning themselves as the mediator or the one with the inside knowledge. They'll tell one person part of a story, tell another person a different version, and then watch the chaos unfold. While everyone else is busy dealing with the fallout, the manipulator quietly gains influence because they seem like the only one who understands what's going on. This tactic is especially common in workplaces, where office politics can become a playground for their schemes. What makes manipulators particularly dangerous is that their tactics are easy to dismiss at first. Unlike the Intimidator, who's loud and aggressive, the manipulator works slowly, almost invisibly. You might not even realize you're being controlled until you find yourself exhausted, full of self-doubt, and constantly bending to someone else's agenda. Their influence seeps into your decisions, your confidence, and even your identity. And because they often come across as charming or caring on the surface, outsiders rarely see the truth. This makes it even harder for victims to speak up because they fear not being believed or being painted as overdramatic. The psychological pull of a manipulator is strong because they target the very qualities that make you human: your kindness, your loyalty, and your empathy. They use these against you, making you feel guilty for resisting or selfish for setting boundaries. But the truth is, their entire game depends on you staying uncertain and pliable. The moment you recognize the manipulation and stop playing along, you disrupt their control. Just like the Intimidator loses power when you stop reacting with fear, the manipulator loses power when you stop giving them the benefit of the doubt. The Underminer. The Underminer is perhaps the most insidious form of adult bully because they don't always attack directly or openly. Instead, they chip away at you slowly, planting subtle seeds of doubt until your confidence begins to erode. Unlike the Intimidator, who thrives on loud dominance, or the manipulator, who twists truth to control you, the Underminer works quietly in the background. They rarely confront you head-on. Instead, they use small, consistent jabs designed to make you second-guess yourself, your achievements, and even your worth. It's death by 1,000 cuts. Each comment might seem small on its own, but over time, the damage is profound. You can often recognize the Underminer in the form of backhanded compliments. They'll say things like, "You did really well on that project, especially considering how inexperienced you are," or "That outfit looks nice on you today." Usually, you don't pull it off. At first, you might brush it off, thinking they didn't mean harm, but these statements are deliberate. The Underminer cloaks negativity in the language of praise so that their true intent remains hidden. If you call them out, they'll say you're overreacting or that you can't take a joke, making you feel like the problem while they continue to chip away at your self-esteem. In the workplace, Underminers are especially dangerous because they position themselves as helpful colleagues or even friends. They may volunteer feedback that sounds supportive but is designed to highlight your weaknesses. In meetings, they'll casually correct you in front of others, not because it improves the discussion, but because it places them above you. If you get recognition, they'll find ways to downplay it, saying things like, "It wasn't really that complicated," or "She got lucky with the timing." Their goal is to ensure you never feel fully secure in your achievements, because the less confident you are, the easier it is for them to maintain an edge. In relationships, the underminer can be even more destructive. They're the partner or friend who always finds a way to make you feel small. You share a success, and instead of celebrating, they pivot the focus to your flaws. You try something new, and they question whether you're really capable. Over time, you start shrinking your goals, not because you lack ability, but because their voice becomes the one in your head telling you you're not enough. The underminer thrives when you internalize their doubt and begin sabotaging yourself on their behalf. Psychologically, what makes the underminer effective is that they work on your internal dialogue. They don't need to yell or coerce. They simply introduce doubt into your thoughts. Once you start questioning whether you deserve your success or whether you're capable, their work is done. They've trained you to do the bullying for them. Many people who've dealt with an underminer find themselves replaying their words long after the conversation has ended, wondering if they were right. That lingering self-criticism is the underminer's invisible victory. Another tactic underminers use is comparison. They constantly measure you against others in a way that highlights your shortcomings. They'll say things like, "Well, John finished his work much faster," or "Sarah already has more experience than you." While comparison can sometimes be a motivator, the underminer uses it as a tool to highlight where you fall short, ensuring that you always feel a step behind. This creates a cycle where you chase validation you'll never receive, because no matter what you do, the underminer will move the finish line. What's even more frustrating about underminers is how well they disguise themselves. To outsiders, they often appear supportive, reasonable, or even charming. They know how to keep their critiques subtle enough that others don't notice, which makes it difficult for you to explain the problem without sounding overly sensitive. You might try to confide in someone else, only to hear, "Really? They seem so nice." This isolation works in the underminer's favor, because the less credible you seem, the easier it is for them to continue unchallenged. The underminer's behavior is rooted in insecurity, much like other bullies, but rather than confronting it directly, they tear others down quietly to elevate themselves. They don't want to risk open conflict, so they hide behind sarcasm, false concern, or faux encouragement. Their power lies in subtlety, which is why recognizing them can be so difficult. But make no mistake, the underminer's goal is control. By weakening your self-belief, they keep you from stepping fully into your potential. To spot an underminer, pay attention to how you feel after interactions with them. Do you consistently leave conversations questioning yourself? Do you hesitate to share successes because you know they'll find a way to minimize them? Do their jokes feel more like digs? These are not coincidences, they are patterns. The more you notice these patterns, the clearer their tactics become. Awareness is critical, because once you see the underminer for who they are, their words lose some of their sting. What makes dealing with underminers so challenging is that their attacks are often so subtle, you might feel petty for calling them out. That's exactly their strategy. They want you to doubt yourself, to second-guess whether what they said was even negative. But once you recognize the intent behind their words, you begin to reclaim your confidence. Their comments are not reflections of your ability. They're reflections of their own insecurity projected onto you. By refusing to internalize their doubt, you rob them of the quiet control they seek to maintain. The control freak. The control freak is another form of adult bully, and unlike the intimidator who thrives on fear or the manipulator who plays with emotions, this type relies on domination through constant interference and micromanagement. Their need for control is relentless, and it shows up in every area of life, whether it's at work, in friendships, or in intimate relationships. The control freak does not simply make suggestions or offer advice. They want to dictate every choice you make, from the smallest decision to the biggest milestones. At first, it may appear as though they are simply being responsible, organized, or concerned, but the deeper truth is that they are stripping away your independence piece by piece until you feel incapable of making your own decisions without their approval. You see this clearly in the workplace when a control freak boss or colleague hovers over every move you make, double-checking your work, questioning your methods, and offering unsolicited corrections even when unnecessary. They often disguise their interference as guidance, saying things like, "I just want to make sure it's done right," or "I'm only trying to help." But in reality, it's not about the quality of the work. It's about their need to assert dominance over how things are done. This behavior creates an environment where employees feel suffocated, creativity is stifled, and confidence erodes because no one feels trusted to carry out tasks independently. The control freak cannot delegate because in their mind, no one else is capable enough, and so they use their authority to maintain a grip on every detail. In personal relationships, the control freak is even more invasive. They may disguise their behavior as care or love, but the underlying motive is the same: to dictate your life. They might question where you go, who you spend time with, or how you spend your money. They present their control as concern. "I just worry about you," or "I know what's best for us." Over time, you start noticing that you no longer make decisions freely. What you wear, the hobbies you pursue, the friends you keep, everything gets filtered through their judgment first. It's not always loud or aggressive, but it's constant, and the weight of their interference leaves you drained. The control freak thrives on dependency. They want you to rely on them for approval before taking action, because the more dependent you become, the more secure their power is. If you resist, they may guilt trip you, accusing you of being ungrateful for their help, or they may escalate with anger to push you back into compliance. The end goal is the same: to keep you tethered so tightly to their influence that you lose trust in your own ability to navigate life without them. Psychologically, control freaks often operate from deep insecurity and fear of unpredictability. They cannot tolerate outcomes they can't manage, so they attempt to control people the way they control situations. But unlike the manipulator, who primarily twists emotions, or the underminer, who chips away at confidence, the control freak uses direct involvement to dominate every choice. Their fear of losing control is so great that they would rather suffocate relationships than allow others the freedom to act independently. And while they might believe they are protecting or guiding, what they are actually doing is dismantling autonomy and replacing it with obedience. A common tactic control freaks use is micromanagement disguised as advice. They insert themselves into your decisions, offering constant suggestions that are really demands in disguise. You'll notice that these suggestions rarely leave space for your opinion. They're structured in a way that makes disagreement feel wrong or even dangerous. If you do push back, they may quickly shift into victim mode, acting as though your independence is a rejection of their care. This emotional flip keeps many people trapped because they feel guilty for asserting their own choices. Control freaks also manipulate time and energy by constantly monitoring and questioning. They might check in excessively, demand updates, or require justification for even minor decisions. This level of surveillance creates pressure, as if you're always under watch. Over time, you begin to self-censor, adjusting your actions preemptively to avoid confrontation. That preemptive obedience is exactly what they want, because it means they've managed to control you without even needing to speak. In group dynamics, control freaks often take over leadership roles, not because they are the most capable, but because they refuse to let others take charge. They dominate discussions, overrule decisions, and make it difficult for collaborative voices to be heard. They thrive in settings where they can mask their behavior as leadership or responsibility, when in reality, it's about feeding their need to dictate outcomes. This creates tension within teams because innovation and trust cannot flourish when one person insists on having the final say in everything. To identify a control freak, ask yourself how free you feel in their presence. Do you feel like your choices are genuinely yours? Or do you find yourself adjusting to avoid conflict with them? Do you hear their voice in your head when making decisions, second-guessing whether they would approve? Do you find yourself hiding aspects of your life just to maintain peace? These are signs that someone's need for control is overshadowing your independence. Unlike guidance, which empowers you, control strips you of confidence and autonomy, leaving you more dependent on the very person who is keeping you small. What makes the control freak particularly damaging is how their behavior often goes unnoticed by outsiders. To others, they might look like they're simply protective, detail-oriented, or invested. but the person on the receiving end feels suffocated. And because the control freak insists that their behavior comes from love, care, or responsibility, it's easy to second-guess whether you're overreacting. That self-doubt is their biggest weapon because it stops you from reclaiming your freedom. The truth is, care builds confidence, but control destroys it. And until you recognize that difference, the control freak continues to dictate not only your actions, but also your sense of self. How to stop them? Power moves. Stopping adult bullies requires strategy, discipline, and an understanding that power dynamics are always at play. Unlike children who bully out in the open with physical intimidation or name-calling, adult bullies often operate with more sophistication. This means that if you react impulsively, emotionally, or without preparation, you risk giving them exactly what they want: control over your emotions and, by extension, over you. Learning how to stop them begins with knowing yourself and knowing that you do not need to fight them on their terms. You need to fight them on your terms, with calmness, clarity, and unwavering strength. The first and most important power move is establishing boundaries early. Bullies test people constantly, probing for weaknesses, watching who lets their behavior slide and who resists. If you don't clearly set the tone from the beginning, they assume they can push further. Boundaries are not just about words, they're about actions. It's not enough to say, "I won't tolerate disrespect." You have to show it by the way you respond when that line is crossed. For example, if a colleague consistently interrupts you in meetings, your boundary is making it clear you will not allow it by calmly but firmly interjecting with, "I wasn't finished speaking." If a partner uses guilt to control you, your boundary might be refusing to comply when guilt is applied and saying, "I don't make choices based on guilt." Boundaries are signals, and the sooner you send them, the harder it is for a bully to gain control. Staying calm under pressure is another critical move because bullies feed off reactions. They want you to get angry, cry, stumble over your words, or lash out, because the moment you do, they've shifted the power back to themselves. They can point to your reaction as evidence that you're unstable, weak, or unprofessional. Calmness doesn't mean silence, it means control. It's speaking firmly, holding steady eye contact, and refusing to let their behavior dictate your emotional state. Think of it like psychological judo. Instead of meeting their aggression with aggression, you let their energy pass by without giving them resistance they can use. The less you react, the more frustrated they become, and eventually they expose themselves because their tactics stop working on you. Direct language is another weapon you must learn to wield. Bullies rely on ambiguity. They thrive when people dance around the truth, hesitate, or over-explain. Every time you justify your stance with long-winded reasoning, you hand them material to twist against you. Instead, practice using concise, powerful statements. "That's inappropriate. Don't speak to me that way. That behavior is unacceptable." These are short, direct, and leave little room for argument. They also signal that you know your own value and don't need to defend it with explanations. Direct language doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be clear. And clarity, in the face of manipulation or intimidation, is one of the strongest tools you have. Documentation is a power move, especially critical in professional settings, but it can also apply to personal life. Adult bullies often rely on subtlety so they can deny or minimize their behavior when challenged. By keeping records, whether it's saving emails, documenting conversations, or noting specific incidents, you create a pattern that becomes undeniable. In the workplace, this can protect you when you need to escalate an issue to HR or leadership. In relationships, documenting behavior can help you recognize patterns that you might otherwise excuse or overlook. Evidence is powerful because it removes the he said, she said dynamic and replaces it with concrete facts. Bullies hate facts because they expose their behavior in a way that can't be spun or denied. Walking away, however, is perhaps the most underestimated but powerful move of all. Bullies want to keep you engaged in their game because engagement, whether it's arguing, defending, or reacting, keeps the power dynamic alive. When you refuse to engage, when you walk away, You send a message louder than any argument could. You don't control me. This doesn't mean avoiding the problem or being passive. It means recognizing when a situation is not worth your energy and choosing to preserve your strength instead of wasting it. Walking away can look like leaving a conversation mid-insult, disengaging from an online attack, or even ending a toxic relationship altogether. Bullies can only play with those who stay in the game, so by walking away, you remove their source of power completely. Another key element in stopping bullies is consistency. One boundary set once will not deter them forever. They will test you again, sometimes harder, to see if you mean what you say. If you falter, if you give in after they push back, they learn that persistence pays off. But if you remain consistent, calm every time, direct every time, firm every time, they eventually realize they cannot win with you. This consistency builds respect, even from those who initially tried to dominate you, because bullies respect strength. They may not like you, but they will know not to target you, because you refuse to play by their rules. It's also crucial to understand the role of silence in power moves. Silence, when used deliberately, is not weakness, it's dominance. If someone tries to provoke you with insults or passive-aggressive comments, sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Silence unsettles bullies because they don't know how to interpret it. They want a reaction to feed off, and when you give them none, it leaves them grasping for control. Strategic silence, paired with strong body language, shows composure and makes it clear that their words have no power over you. Equally important is learning how to use allies. Bullies thrive when they isolate their targets, making you feel like you stand alone. But when you connect with others, whether coworkers, friends, or family, you build a network of support that makes it harder for the bully to operate. For example, in a workplace, if multiple people document the same behavior, the bully loses their ability to spin the narrative as just a misunderstanding. In personal life, allies can validate your experiences, reminding you that what you're facing is real and not something you should excuse. Allies amplify your strength because bullies rarely thrive in environments where their behavior is exposed to more than one set of eyes. An advanced power move is flipping the script by asking questions. Instead of defending yourself when a bully accuses or criticizes, you turn the spotlight back onto them. If they say, "You never do anything right," respond calmly with, "What specifically do you mean?" If they attempt to guilt trip you, ask, "Why do you think that's my responsibility?" Questions force bullies to clarify, and often their accusations crumble under scrutiny because they were never grounded in truth to begin with. This technique disrupts their rhythm and puts you in the position of control without ever raising your voice. One of the most empowering aspects of dealing with bullies is realizing that you always have choices. Bullies try to create an illusion of powerlessness, but the reality is that your response determines their success. They can provoke, manipulate, or intimidate, but unless you surrender your reaction, their tools remain ineffective. Choosing to respond with calm, directness, and boundaries shifts the balance of power in your favor. And each time you practice these power moves, you strengthen your sense of self, making it harder for anyone to shake it in the future. You must also recognize that stopping bullies is not about changing them. It's about changing the way you engage with them. You cannot make an intimidator less aggressive or a manipulator more honest. What you can do is make it clear that their tactics do not work on you. When you stop rewarding their behavior with fear, compliance, or self-doubt, they are forced to either change their approach or move on. This is why personal strength, mental, emotional, and even physical, becomes the ultimate shield. It is not about confrontation. It is about control over yourself. Lastly, stopping bullies requires courage. It is not easy to confront someone who is aggressive, manipulative, undermining, or controlling. It takes courage to set boundaries, courage to remain calm under provocation, courage to walk away when necessary. But courage grows stronger each time you use it. The first time you stand up to an adult bully, it may feel terrifying. The second time, it will feel easier. Over time, you will notice that not only do you command more respect from others, but you also carry yourself with a new level of confidence. This confidence is what ultimately protects you, because bullies look for those who appear vulnerable. When you carry yourself with strength, when you walk into a room with calm composure and unshakable self-assurance, bullies know instinctively that you are not someone they can break. Adult bullies target people not at random, but strategically. They are highly attuned to vulnerability, scanning for signals that someone may be hesitant, insecure, or overly accommodating. Unlike children, who often bully out of impulsive frustration or immaturity, adult bullies operate with intent and calculation. They study how people react, looking for patterns they can exploit. If someone flinches under criticism, avoids confrontation, or bends to others' wishes out of fear of conflict, the bully identifies that as a weakness to leverage. Their goal is not necessarily personal enjoyment of hurting someone, although some do take satisfaction in dominance. It is control. They want to manipulate circumstances so that their target consistently reacts in ways that reinforce the bully's sense of superiority. The psychological tactics they use are subtle but powerful. Gaslighting is a common method where the bully deliberately twists facts or situations to make the victim question their own memory, judgment, or perception. This isn't just mean-spirited. It's highly effective because it erodes confidence over time. The more someone doubts themselves, the less likely they are to challenge the bully's authority or interference. Similarly, guilt tripping is used to control emotions and behavior. By creating a sense of obligation, the bully can manipulate targets into doing things they would otherwise refuse. It is a slow, calculated way of reshaping behavior without overt confrontation, and it often leaves the victim feeling both confused and responsible for the bully's actions. Adult bullies also prey on social dynamics. They understand that influence and perception are key tools of power. By undermining confidence, spreading subtle rumors, or isolating someone socially or professionally, they create environments where the target feels unsupported. Bullies exploit the human desire for acceptance and belonging, making it psychologically taxing for the victim to resist. Over time, these strategies can lead to chronic stress, self-doubt, and even anxiety, which further strengthens the bully's position. An important psychological principle to understand is that bullies crave reactions. They feed on emotional responses because reactions validate their control. Fear, anger, embarrassment, or defensiveness are all fuel to reinforce the power imbalance. Recognizing this is key. If you learn to maintain composure, to respond with calm and clarity, the bully's tools lose their effect. Strength and self-possession are inherently threatening to bullies because they break the predictable pattern they rely on to dominate. Understanding the psychological mechanics of adult bullying allows you to shift the dynamic. Once you see that their aggression, manipulation, or control is a calculated response to perceived weakness, you can change your behavior to resist. Bullies are effective only if their targets are unaware, reactive, or compliant. Awareness, self-control, and emotional regulation transform you from a passive target into a person who commands respect. This knowledge becomes a tool to reclaim autonomy, limit their influence, and gradually dismantle the psychological leverage they hold over you, without engaging in needless conflict. Bullies don't disappear simply because we grow older. They adapt. The aggression you may have faced on a playground transforms into more sophisticated tactics in adulthood. But the essence remains the same. They are trying to control, manipulate, or diminish you. What separates those who succumb from those who rise above is awareness, strategy, and most importantly, self-respect. You must understand that no one has the right to dictate your thoughts, feelings, or actions. Recognizing this is the first step in taking back control of your life. Adult bullies feed on silence, hesitation, and fear. The moment you refuse to give them that fuel, you take away their power. Standing tall in the presence of a bully is not simply about posture. It's about presence, confidence, and unwavering belief in your own value. Your reactions communicate more than words ever could. When you remain composed under pressure, refuse to internalize their attempts to undermine you, and assert your boundaries clearly, you send a message louder than any argument. You are not a person to be controlled. This is not aggression. It is strength. Bullies may try to provoke you, guilt you, or intimidate you, but they cannot win without your consent. Control begins the moment you decide to own your response, rather than react impulsively to their tactics. Setting boundaries is a revolutionary act against adult bullying. It may feel uncomfortable at first because bullies are skilled at testing limits, pushing past comfort zones to see who yields. But every boundary you maintain, every line you refuse to let them cross, chips away at their influence. Boundaries are not walls. They are signals of self-respect, clarity, and agency. They teach bullies that their power is limited, that your autonomy is non-negotiable, and that you are capable of maintaining control over your environment. Over time, this consistency in asserting boundaries builds an internal armor that is resistant to manipulation, intimidation, or emotional exploitation. Walking away when necessary is another profound demonstration of power. Refusing to participate in a bully's game is not defeat, it is strategy. Adult bullies thrive on engagement, on reactions, on emotional responses that validate their dominance. When you disengage, when you remove yourself from their sphere of influence, you reclaim your energy, your focus, and your self-worth. Walking away is a statement. You are no longer a participant in a narrative that seeks to diminish you. It is a reminder that the ultimate control lies not with the bully, but with the individual who refuses to be manipulated. Embracing calmness, clarity, and composure is the ultimate disruption to a bully's tactics. When they attempt to provoke fear or anger, when they try to undermine confidence or twist reality, remaining grounded renders their efforts ineffective. Strength is often silent. It is shown in controlled words, measured responses, and the refusal to participate in toxic games. Adult bullies rely on predictable reactions to maintain their advantage. By mastering your emotional response, by refusing to provide the fuel they seek, you dismantle the dynamic they depend on. You shift from being the target to being the person in charge of the situation. Empowerment comes from recognizing that respect is commanded, not begged for. Bullies may attempt to diminish you, control your environment, or question your decisions, but your authority over yourself cannot be taken without consent. Standing firm in your principles, asserting your boundaries, and maintaining your composure creates an unshakable presence. This presence signals to everyone around you, bullies included, that you are not easily swayed, manipulated, or intimidated. Strength does not always require confrontation. Sometimes the quiet assertion of confidence and integrity is enough to neutralize attempts at control. The truth is, adult bullies only succeed if you let them. Their power is not inherent. It is granted through your reactions, hesitation, and compliance. By taking ownership of your choices, responding with clarity rather than emotion, and refusing to shrink in the face of intimidation, you reclaim authority.